All right, class. Want to just talk about three uses of a knife. I'm going to try to break this up into chapter discussions, and I want to hit some of the most important things about the text. First off, let's sort of introduce it as an idea that this is a theory of drama. And when we talk about theory, we are talking about um, something that's absolutely not concrete, right? As we have consistently talked about this semester, we have seen where this idea of concrete versus abstract, right, literal versus metaphorical, this sort of dichotomy of relationship that we analyzed while we were reading poems throughout the first half of the semester. This doesn't stop with poetry, right? We've already discussed throughout the class that this is consistent across all art forms. And the truth is, this is consistent in all the science and religion as well. You're going to see this theoretical element of possibility, right? And what we're looking at when we're talking about the theoretical is the broad scope possibilities, okay? And so what we could say when we say this is a theory of drama is that this is what drama could possibly be about. But I really like this theory. Obviously, it's why I teach it. And this theoretical lens, right? So we're using a metaphor there, right? There's a lens through which we look, sort of put our eye to something and look through it in order to see something at a certain distance or in a certain way. And we're going to use this theory and we're going to look through this theory at the two plays that we read. But we're going to also just look through this theory as the idea of drama itself. And I want to point to a couple of things that are important about that. And that is, one, this is one person's theory, right? And obviously somebody who's important enough, in their own mind, important enough to write something, but who has had such a career as David Mamet in drama, gets to say some things about drama because he's been an enormously successful playwright and screenwriter for that matter, for those of you who perhaps are interested in the crossover. And one of the plays for sure we're going to look at, August Osage County, which many of you probably already started reading, has an excellent movie crossover and screenwriting aspect. So the fact is that he's an extraordinarily good artist. Therefore, he has the opportunity to write about art from a particular perspective or a particular lens, and that's what he's doing here. Okay, and two is the fact that I'm going to ask you to think in these theoretical terms, but I'm not going to ask you to limit what drama can be to just this theory, right? It can just be, Mamet's pretty passionate in this book about sort of trash entertainment. And he says that's not drama. Well, that's his theory, right? And that's his lens. And we're going to talk about drama from that lens, right? We're going to analyze these plays from that lens. But obviously, it doesn't have to be concretely true, right? So we still want to always make sure that this is theoretical. Now, why do I use a particular lens? Well, we talk about theory because what we're really wanting to achieve is the skill set of being able to look at something in a particular context. And the context that we're going to look at our drama is through the lens of three uses of the knife. Basically what that means, if we go all the way back to English 101, is that we're going to define drama, right? Our sort of definition essay from 101. We're going to define it in terms of three uses of the knife, and then we're going to see in an argumentative fashion, right? That's 1 and 2. We're going to see how these dramas that we read fit that definition. And that's the goal of analyzing the theory. Is the goal of reading the plays and looking at them in the theory is, do the plays fit what Mamet says drama should do? Okay, or good drama does, right? Is this good drama, and why based on this lens? Okay. And so looking at that, or at least understanding it from that context, we want to look at three uses of the knife. Now, I am going to do this lecture sort of really old school. I don't like lecture notes per se. I like just generally talking about things. However, given our circumstances, I've earmarked several pages in the book itself, and I am going to try to give you some page points that I think are very valuable to you, or could be very valuable to you in understanding this lens. First off, chapter 1 he calls the wind chill factor. Well, that's immediately a metaphor, right? That title is connecting this idea to our understanding of weather. Well, why? Well, he points out, particularly on what is essentially page 3, that we look at the weather as some measured, sort of mechanized relationship to ourselves, right? He immediately starts with saying, great, it's raining, just when I'm blue. Isn't life just like that, right? And he points to the fact that we exploit this sort of dramatic interlude, right, in our relationship with the weather. And I think that this is important for us to even notice now in the passion, right? So remember that we're analyzing our emotional experience here, right? Our relationship to the art itself. And we are passionate about weather in some context. It's frustrating. We want it to snow when we go skiing. We want it sunny when we're on the beach. There's stress about climate change and our relationship to that. And we wonder about that is, and we employ exaggeration, starting at the bottom of page 3. We employ exaggeration and ironic juxtaposition, inversion, projection, and all the tools that dramatists use to create and a psychoanalyst uses to interpret emotionally significant phenomena. We do this with something as simple and as mundane and as regular and as usual as with the weather. Okay? And we do this on a regular basis, right? So we have this dramatic interplay is what he's gonna be referring to, dramatic interplay, right? And really what we can say in a simple metaphorical sense is that we have the emotional roller coaster that we all ride day in and day out, right? The psychologist in me wants to jump out and say, well, this is the way that our emotions work to push us forward, right? We have high emotions, so we move. We have low emotions, so we stop moving. High emotions, we move. Low emotions, we stop moving. At some point, we get into some level of rhythm, right? And that rhythm moves us. We saw it in poetry. We see it in the various other arts. And he's arguing that that's what drama is. Drama is the rhythm or the rhythmic movement of our emotions progressing us through life. And we are connected to those things because we see familiar rhythms. We feel familiar rhythms in the stories and the conversations, the plot lines and the interludes that we engage in. And he's pointing to the most mundane things of life. And by mundane, I just mean just plain and regular, right? Not extraordinary, but plain and regular. And we see how these plain and regular things push and pull our emotions. Now, that's not to mention things that are outside of the norm or the extraordinary. I mean, we can tell stories of hurricanes. We're having a health crisis right now. These things obviously also push and pull. They may cause us to overreact, or they may cause us to shut down. And either one of those would be at the extremes of the response pattern. They would sort of maximize the rhythm in one direction or another and possibly shut it down. And his point is that when things aren't moving enough, right? In extraordinary times, we need no push towards emotion, right? But in regular mundane times, even the bus coming, right, middle of page for how we exaggerate our wait times in lines, how we exaggerate the stories that we tell, right, for the sake of humor or the sake of frustration, right? This constant use of the juxtaposition of things, right? You ever told a funny story about two things that just didn't seem relatable, right? About sort of a raggedy person that sort of walked in and spent a bunch of money at an electronics store, right? I sold electronics at Sears when I was in college, and we worked on commission, and people would always sort of look for the fancy dressed people. They would look for the people that were the most, they looked like they were wealthy, right? And so they, just naturally assumed, right? But that sort of ironic juxtaposition that happens when somebody who doesn't look like that, don't dress like that. I had an older man in coveralls and the white boots, they call them Hackberry Reeboks down here, right? He worked shrimp boat in Cameron, and he came in to buy laptops for his grandkids for school, and pulled out $6,000 cash out of his overalls, and just went to town. Paid out the money, right? Nobody would have expected it. It was ironic. It was a juxtaposition between what we expected and what we didn't. It, according to Mamet, was drama. Okay? That's drama. We also do this in our relational conversation, right? Moving on to page 6. We do this in a relational conversation because we end up using these sort of universal terms, or hyperbole, right? We've already talked about hyperbole in poetry, but we use exaggeration for effect. So we say things like, you always do whatever, fill in the blank, right? Or you never do whatever, fill in the blank. And we know from an argumentative sake, right? Again, revisiting 102, that if we say always or never, we're probably wrong. Right, because all we need is one instance in which the opposite has happened, and we're wrong because we said always or we said never. So universal terms are never safe in sort of that literal, that scientific realm, but they're always safe when it comes to metaphorical truth, right? Just like we go all the way back to the beginning of the semester, the whole idea of metaphorical truth is something that's literally false. But if we treat it as though it's true, it makes our life better, right? Porcupines throwing their quills, right? They don't. They can't. They won't. But if I act like they do, it's better, right? Now, drama doesn't always provide for things being better, so I'm not arguing that having these sort of hyperbolic interludes is the best thing. Certainly not for a relationship. Again, the psychologist coming out of me. But what Mamet is arguing is this is what represents drama, right? We have this irony in the relationship, right? We have these sort of dichotomous pulls. We have the hyperbole. So all of this is present in drama, right? And so we're going to want, for the sake of the class going forward, to be looking for these things, right? Where is hyperbole used in conversation? Is the plot line exaggerated in some way, shape, or form, right? Where is irony here? Right? And I mean, we see irony in our relationships all the time, right? Don't forget sarcasm is irony. Don't forget hypocrisy fits in the realm of irony. These are these connections that we have in relationships that oftentimes frustrate our emotions, but Mamet is arguing that they're providing the rhythm for our movement, right? We are moving, right, because of this push, right? Now, he also points out that there are aspects of drama that we sort of try to gloss over, right? We get bored with politicians pretty quickly. I guess not in recent days, right? We've been sort of set behind the screen with this coronavirus thing and wanting to figure out, what's happening next. But for the most part, politicians are just talking heads, and almost anybody that talks about it will say that. Yet, listen to them, right? And he points to the fact, sort of in the middle of page 6, that these sorts of things are like placeholders in the dramatic progression, and they function similarly to sex scenes or car crashes in a trash film. They're related to no real problem, and they're inserted as a modular treat in a story devoid of content. Now, this is a pretty severe criticism by Mamet of sort of the cheapening of plot lines and that sort of a thing to this sort. He's very critical of the lack of art in many bits of film and drama today. And Mamet has also made a career being critical even of society. One of his most famous plays, entitled Oleanna, sort of discusses the nuances of language and how difficult it can be when speech is so extraordinarily modified that we really can't use nuanced language. We have to be really concrete and really specific. And the whole play of Oleanna is sort of critical of the idea that language just doesn't work that way. And that's part of what we've been talking about this entire semester. That language doesn't work to make everything fit concrete, right? Some things have concrete definitions and we can sort of measure them down. But there's metaphor in everything, right? There are these comparisons, and language uses this all the time to increase our understanding. It's why we say that a table has legs, right? That's a metaphor. And we understand it, and it's very clear, and it's something very concrete, like a table, but we're still using metaphors to understand the function of that table. And so even though we can find sort of this concreteness in things, sort of inanimate objects, even animate objects to a certain extent, we can sometimes get concrete ideas of things. But even in that, outside of a very limited sense of hard science, we still heavily depend upon metaphor or theory in place of some concrete definition, right? And in his theory, there is no place for trash. Trash being that thing that gives our emotions a run without any substance, without any content, without any connection to the real, right? It's like a metaphor with nothing concrete to tie itself to. And so this theory of drama is also, and he starts with this wind chill factor idea that, and so let's follow this closely. The wind chill factor idea is simply this: the concrete measurement of the temperature is a certain degree, let's say 32 freezing, right? The wind chill factor is what that degree really feels like in the environment in which the temperature is being measured, right? And so think about it like this: we know that there are other things adding to that context that the concrete measurement misses, right? The thermometer is so spot on that it measures literally the temperature that is circling around that thermometer, and that is it. And it gives a very stable measurement of the temperature of steady, not moving air, right? But we all know, everybody else knows that the thermometer might read that. But when I'm walking across a parking lot and the wind is blowing, right? When the wind's being moved by the traffic of cars, when the trees aren't blocking certain aspects of the wind, as long as there's wind in that context, that moving air is going to be something colder than that sitting still air that is being so accurately and concretely read. And what can we do about the wind chill factor is we can just estimate that the context changes the concrete ever so slightly, right? However slightly that is. Well, that factor is what we're talking about when Mamet is saying that cheap, quote unquote, drama. He doesn't even let it be called drama, right? Cheap content, empty content, trash film, trash play, trash art is that in which our emotions get carried away, if you will, okay? But there's nothing concrete to tie them back to, right? There's no smidge of reality. We're not talking about science fiction here, right? Because, I mean, anybody who knows sort of science fiction is always pointing to some concrete problem, attempting to address it, sometimes solve it, sometimes measure it. Right? Even something in the comic, even something like The Walking Dead, for example, is more of a criticism of how society breaks down and comes back together, and what good and evil really are, and how, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn says, the thin line between good and evil run down the center of every human heart. Right? That's an artist talking about something. Understanding that we're both victim and perpetrator, that almost simultaneously in everything we do, and how that relationship is not dichotomous, but it's sort of interwoven. And this is what Mamet is getting at. Mamet is basically saying, if we don't have anything concrete to tie our story back to, right, then the hyperbole, then the ironies, then all of those things are just useless. They're just trash, right? They're just taking breaks from a lack of content. They're just going to add a sex scene here or a car crash here to engage some level of emotion, to engage some level of excitement. There's nothing concrete with which to tie it back to. Now, this is like not a general critique of movies or film or even like theater. This is a lens, right? So one of the things we're going to look for in the plays that we're reading is some connection, right, to reality, some tie-in to really important things, concrete things, right? Now, I want to sort of continue, right? He points out on page 7, going into page 8, that even when we're talking about something like the wind chill factor, that with the wind chill factor, things feel colder than they are. So even if the weather is literally hotter than it normally is, right? And again, I'm pulling from this metaphor. I understand. I want us to be connected to this as a metaphor. He says this is an elegant, dramatic device because the wind's not blowing at the same speed all the time, and it's tempered by one's position in or out of its path. The factor allows one to suspend one's disbelief for the pleasure that it affords. In other words, what drama is really offering as well is our ability to move in context, right? So think about it like this. We're reading a story, watching a movie. We're engaged, and we really connect with one character, right? We want that character, right? We want that to be the situation. We start pulling, right? We start caring, right? And so this sort of buy-in is going to be important as this first step as well. But what real drama affords us is the ability to move ourselves. So think about the wind chill factor. I can feel warmer whenever I get out of the wind. I can move myself in the wind in one direction or another, and it can change the way that I feel about the context that I'm in. And drama provides that opportunity. I can move from one place to another. I can see things from multiple different perspectives. And just sort of think about the nuance of just seeing something from the perspective of whoever should be the villain. So think about the relationship between, say, our rich history with the story of Batman, for example, and this most recent Joker film, right? Now all of a sudden we're seeing it through Joker's eyes. Do we not? Does it not affect us a little bit? Does it not change our perception just a hair, if nothing else? I mean, maybe we all still say, he's a little crazy. Um, but does it affect us emotionally? Do we think differently about just calling him a villain? Is good and evil a real black and white proposition anymore? No, because drama allows us to move in context. And this is what Mamet's saying when he's talking about the wind chill factor. It's the fact is that something is concrete, a temperature. There's a concrete temperature. But the wind chill factor is that context in which the temperature exists. And as I move through it, I change the way I feel about the concrete thing, or in relationship to the concrete thing, because there's other things in the context that affect that feeling, right? And so this is a pretty complicated metaphor, but it shows us, at least from this lens, what drama is supposed to be doing, right? My buy-in might be because I'm really connected to the concrete, right? I like that protagonist, the person that's just really fighting for good, and how clear those lines are drawn. Yes, the hero, right? Wyatt Earp, Batman, whoever else is on your list of heroes, right? Clear cut, right? And I mean, we can say that throughout history. We can say that about ball players. We can say that about politicians. We can say that about businessmen and businesswomen, right? But there's always going to be somebody that's going to show you their dark side. There's always going to be somebody that's going to show you that part of them that nobody wanted to talk about, right? That ruthless aspect of them, right? They were, a businessman like Rockefeller, for example, who was such a philanthropist at the end of his life, but just such a ruthless businessman throughout his life. And he could be championed by the economists as understanding the way that markets work. But he's absolutely damned by those who have levels of social awareness, because he just would impoverish people in large scale in order to buy up companies. And then ended his life perhaps one of the greatest philanthropists that ever existed, and we still have Rockefeller Center, right, in New York. And it is sort of representative of a stake in history, if you will. Was he good or was he bad? Who knows? It was just all gray. And it's the wind chill factor, right? So the real answer to that question is, was he good or was he bad? Well, it depends on where you're standing. Is it hot or is it cold? It depends on where you're standing, right? And it depends on how you are sort of associating yourself in that environment. And this is what good drama is going to provide for us. We are naturally going to have a buy-in, hopefully. I mean, anybody who reads stories, if you're willing to read stories, you watch TV shows. I can tell that you watch TV shows because, Netflix is booming, right? Disney Plus is booming, and Hulu is booming. All of these things, and so these are really long. These TV series are complicated novels. They're complicated stories. They're complicated drama. They're interwoven. The characters are all great, and many of these things. I guess I won't speak to all of them universally, but many of them provide exactly what Mamet is talking about as good drama. Right? That there is something happening. There's the protagonist, the antagonist, there's this wrestling between, right? There's this tension that builds to a climax. We've been learning about sort of the idea of storytelling from the time we were young. But it's more than that to Mamet. Mamet's saying we can move ourselves in the context of it, right? This is not just disconnected trash that is making our emotions ride. This is not a roller coaster in which you just fly through feeling like there's danger, and then it stops at the end and you're like, whew, that was a good ride. No, this is actually a composite cutout of someone's life, of some experience. There is something concrete with which to tie yourself to, and that connection is going to be important. What you are going to do then is look, while you're reading drama, at the connection that it makes. Right? you're going to connect to someone. You're going to connect to a character. You're going to connect to a certain plot line, and that's going to be the connect. But you're also going to be able to move through, right? You're going to see the positive and the negative of each character. You're going to see the positive and the negative of each plot line. And I'm going to ask you throughout the course of reading the next two plays to sort of see what that wrestling match is about, right? Because it's real complicated. It can be. And the more that you deal with that, the more that you exist in that, the better experience that you're going to have with drama, right? Now, I'm skipping ahead pretty far here to page 25. Mamet says the good play will not concern itself with cares, however much they do occupy us day to day. That can be dealt with rationally. In other words, the drama's not worried about particular cares every day. We can rationally sort of deal with our everyday cares, right? Our grocery shopping, our washing of dishes, our going to work, those sorts of things. Those things are that mundane aspect or experience of life. Now, these things might be woven into what drama is about, and he'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's not those things that it's attempting to affect. He says drama doesn't need to affect people's behavior. Right? It's not trying to change the way that you live your life. He does it very funny. He said there's a great and very, very effective tool that changes people's attitudes and makes them see the world in a new way. It's called a gun. Right? Now, the gun there is a metaphor for all forms of force that we can use, right, to affect attitudes and change people's behavior. And we do that all the time. Power, the gun representing power in some way or symbolizing power, does that all the time. And we can see how power can manipulate a culture. He says he's never met an audience that wasn't smarter than him. Now, again, he's going to carry this gun metaphor over. Page 26. An audience or a populace can be coerced by a lie or a bribe, which is the symbolic of the gun to him. And it can be instructed and preached at by anyone with a soapbox and a lack of respect. In other words, he's saying, if you're preaching at them, you don't respect them. You don't think that they're smart enough to live life on their own, right? And that's why he said on the previous page that he thinks the audience is smarter than him collectively every time. Now, think about this. That's the same thing that I've been saying all semester, and that is you bring lived experience to a poetry, to a piece of poetry, to a drama, to any kind of an artistic experience. You bring a lived experience or some other spot in the context in which you're feeling a different temperature, and that is important. Collectively, Mamet saying that's what's important here. I'm not trying to use a gun to manipulate you to think the way that I'm thinking, right? And I mean, let's go back to the very beginning of this course. This is not an argument, right? This is not, I am going to use that term. So let me be really clear here. I'm sorry. I'm going to use the word argument because what I am going to want you to do is make statements of fact that you use information to support. And so that's a very academic way of using an argument. In this sense, we're not trying to come to an analytical conclusion. I guess that's what I really, really want, because there is not a universal analytical conclusion here. And he is pointing to the fact that any drama that is trying to manipulate social mores or is trying to affect a person's regular behavior, whether or not they go to church, whether or not they believe in some sort of social rights, whether or not, and I mean, we do see this all the time. We see the sort of social tooling in the movies or in drama. He's calling all of that trash, right? He's saying that that means that the artist doesn't respect the audience. He goes so far as saying that the audience is being abused. They're not being changed, they're being forced. Dramatists who aim to change the world assume a moral superiority to the audience and allow the audience to assume a moral superiority to those people in the play who don't accept the views of the hero. Further, he says it's not the dramatist's job to bring about social change. There are great men and great women who affect social change. They do so through costly demonstrations of personal courage. They risk getting their heads beat in during the March on Montgomery, or chain themselves to a pillar, or stand up to ridicule or scorn. They put their lives on the line, and that can inspire heroism in others. But the purpose of art is not to change, but delight. Right? And the delight there is not that intentional sort of forced change. Those things are done through the passion and sacrifices of individuals. That's what he's saying. That art is not the mode of social change. It's the mode of delight. And the delight that he's pointing to is the actual relief, right? When we think of delight, how delightful something is, think about the way that we use that term. It was delightful to see you, right? It was refreshing. It was inspiring. It was something that empowered me perhaps whenever I was weary or when I wasn't expecting to be empowered. It's that sort of cool glass of sweet tea after you cut the yard, right? Or it's the long lost reunion between a deployed soldier and his family at the airport. It's the conversation that you never expected to have with your father before death, or some other connection. These things are delightful, and we call them delightful, right? Because they provide a refreshing of some sort, right? And the refreshing of drama from Mamet is that connection that we're able to make, and not just the connection with the quote-unquote hero, right? Because to him, stories that are any good, drama that is any good, those lines can't be just clearly and concretely drawn. There's going to be some suspense. There's going to be some unknown, right? Not all movies accomplish this. Not all plays accomplish this. But Mamet says they're not drama if they don't accomplish this, right? On page 27, at the very top, the theater exists to deal with problems of the soul, with the mysteries of human life, not with its quotidian calamities. At the bottom of that page, I don't believe reaching people is the purpose of art. In fact, I don't know what reaching people means. I know what Hazlitt said. It's easy to get the mob to agree with you. All you have to do is agree with the mob. Aristotle wrote that no evil can befall a good person either in this life or after death. This pronunciamento can be taken as a jejune promise, or it can perhaps more correctly be taken as a definition of evil. That is, whatever befalls the good person, however devastating, cannot be evil if it does not spring from his or her own actions. A birth defect may be unfortunate, but it cannot be evil. This idea then that good and evil have this inherent relationship with the actions and the behaviors of an individual within a given context. Right? Might we think of situations in which we felt murder was justified? If murder is in and of itself evil, it could never be justified. Well, there's that very arrogant again. And this is what Mamet calls drama. Okay? So for chapter 1 of this, I'm going to ask you to write about this. You connect to characters, okay? You connect to heroes. But as you change context, as you change perspectives, the hero might not look so heroic. The villain might not seem so villainous. There might be some balance to that in one direction or another. And in that, what we're seeing, according to Mamet's theory here, is drama can develop out of that because it's not trying to manipulate behavior or show behavior. It's trying to provide the delight, or dare we say refreshment, of a connection with a cast of actors who are showing us that we're not alone in the world, in wondering if what we're doing is right or wrong all the time. If the way we manage ourselves is correct or incorrect, and how the gray area is harder to navigate than some preposterous proponent might assume. And he's already thrown them all under the bus. But think about the cheap sort of social film or the politician or any of those contexts. He's saying they're not artists. They're not artists because they're pretending like good and evil is clear cut. They're pretending like you can see good and evil clearly enough and that everybody should behave this way, and if they all behave this way, then the world would be good. And that's sort of a utopian dream. Mamet would call it trash. Right? And there's something more complicated. There's something more nuanced, right? There's ironies and juxtapositions and hyperboles that would exist in all of this that we would say, well, we need the language to gather an understanding of it. But it's not meant to change me. It's meant to delight me. Because now I don't have to wonder if everything's perfect for me. I can sort of breathe more easily, in a more divided sense, that good and evil aren't really clear to anyone. And those who say that it is, well, they're trying to agree with the mob to get the mob to agree with them. And they're trying to manipulate an audience that they don't respect. That's chapter 1. Email, reach out if you have any questions or concerns. I will post a writing assignment beneath this video and try to give us some headlines to the rest of the course. So good luck. Stay well. Stay healthy, and hopefully we can find some enjoyment in this moving towards the end of the semester.